Hello everybody, welcome back to another installment from our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Listen to a panel of experienced business leaders who've successfully built their businesses on circular economy principles. They'll share how they've gone about it and also what they wish they had known when they started out. Here's a sneak preview.
Every baby goes through 5,000 nappies, terrifying statistics. So these 650 babies that live on the island of Tuvalu go through 1 million nappies a year. So we're looking at work to eradicate all of those nappies and make great compost.
We're highly circular. So our mill in Melbourne's been operating since 1985 and the one in Sydney since 1993. And both of those mills use 100% scrap feed, scrap steel as their source. And ultimately, we've been circular long before it was the new black. For us, it's really an opportunity where we've developed those metrics based on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation approach to help support and foster the discussion in this space.
It was really around the Cradle to Cradle principles. We read the book, met with Bill McDonough. We were the first product to be Cradle to Cradle certified.
Very little innovation in our sector for the past 50, 100 years, really. Buildings haven't changed. And in fact, the trend is to use less high quality materials, cheaper composites that allow you to build at an economic rate. And that client recognizes that as a second-hand product, there's going to be inherent resistance. Does it meet code requirements? Is it strong enough? Has it been damaged? Where was it? And so those are ever present.
We had to engage with our manufacturer in Ohio. They signed an NDA with the folks from Cradle to Cradle, and then everyone up the supply chain, every element, if you think of every element of that product, signs an NDA, and that took months to convince them.
But I really do believe that collaboration, and from the examples that we're seeing at the ACE Hub as well, collaboration is not only critical, but it's also so valuable to businesses.
I think the biggest challenge perhaps from the circular economy in terms of embedding it in business is that justification for shifting the business model from something that's been entrenched for so many years to something that is potentially quite scary for a lot of companies.
Throughout this installment, you'll learn why they adopted circularity, the successes and pitfalls they encountered, as well as the tools and metrics they used. With that, let's get started.
Great, so let's get started. So I'm Jim Godin, Head of Circular Economy at thinkstep-anz. Today's webinar is about the circular economy from a product perspective. We're going to go through brief introductions to the panelists. We have a fantastic panel for you today of some really experienced practitioners in the circular economy. So we're going to have a brief introduction to them, and then we'll go into the panel discussion to pick up on their perspectives and their experience from implementing circular economy models. And we'll have a Q&A at the end as time allows. Before I get into the webinar, just a comment that this is one of a series of events that we're organising in collaboration with Planet Ark. So watch for the upcoming dates for these workshops that follow on from this webinar. So we have today's webinar, which focuses on circular economy from a product perspective. We're then planning an introductory workshop, which covers the why and how of a circular economy, and then a number of deep dive sessions focusing on quantifying circularity, sustainable circular economy, and certification and communication. So these are all to follow. Do look out for those. We'd love to have you along on those. With me on the call is Nicole Garofano, who's the Head of Circular Economy Development at Planet Ark. And we have, as I said, a fantastic panel of three really experienced practitioners in the circular economy. We have Jason Graham-Nye, who's the co-founder of Diapers. We have Jed Finch, who's the R&D manager at Xframe. And we have David Bell, who's the Manager of Sustainability and Insights at InfraBuild. So this is hopefully going to be a fantastic conversation today, which I hope you'll all really enjoy. So just to get things started, I'm going to hand over to Nicole, who will give you a couple of minutes introduction to Planet Ark, and we'll move through the other panelists after that. Nicole, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jim. It's such a pleasure to be here and representing Planet Ark and the Australian Circular Economy Hub. As Jim mentioned, my role is the Head of Circular Economy Development. So I am charged with developing relationships between organisations who are adopting the circular economy principles with those who would like to, and be a facilitator of those relationships to increase knowledge and action in the circular economy. So my role today is just to introduce you very briefly to Planet Ark and the ACE Hub, or the Australian Circular Economy Hub. Many of you in Australia may be familiar with Planet Ark. We've been operating for 30 years this year. And over that time, we've become the most trusted environmental behaviour change organisation in Australia. We have a focus on creating or facilitating positive environmental outcomes. And some of the programs that maybe you might be familiar with, there's quite a number. And certainly before I started with Planet Ark in May last year, I wasn't familiar with how many were actually in place, but this is a snapshot. Some of you might be familiar with Recycling Near You, which is a consumer available site. It's also listed and connected with councils. Councils across Australia can list their local resources when it comes to recycling of a range of streams. We also have the Australian Recycling Label, which is in collaboration with the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, and this assists brand owners in determining recyclability of packaging. So really important services that work with businesses, governments and community to improve their environmental outcomes. But the most one that's most relevant to today's conversation is the Australian Circular Economy Hub. And that is Planet Ark's latest initiative. It's now a year old. And so the ACE Hub, the mission of the ACE Hub is to facilitate the transition to a circular economy in Australia. We are supported by a number of funding partners, with the Australian government being core to that, also Bingo Industries, Keep Cup and Planet Ark Power. And so the basis of the ACE Hub is to provide a knowledge platform that's trusted, easy to use and centralised. We know that there's a lot of information around the circular economy, and for Australia, we are looking to provide that resource, particularly to businesses and governments, to facilitate that transition. We have a website with a number of case studies. We have webinars, event listings, advisory board and working group members, and importantly, technical supporters. And this is the relationship that we have with ThinkStep that brings us here to join you today to learn much more about the circular economy from these three experienced operators. So that's a quick snapshot. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Nicole. Jason, can we hear from you next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. I just want to whip through some quick slides here. This is sort of starting definitionally. As mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Diapers. Been in the space since 2002 when we fell pregnant with our first son and read the book Cradle to Cradle by Bill McDonough. Moved to the US and launched a sort of Cradle to Cradle business. But I thought this slide was quite a smart way to quickly start, just from where people sit on this continuum from linear at the bottom to circular at the top, and why we really chose to focus as circular as we could, and looking at ways we can rethink how products can be used in their sort of R1 as one, and then a few other kind of intersection points there. Our big competitors, Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark, are really focusing on R8, which is recycling of plastics, which we think is somewhat problematic and limited, but we've all got to start somewhere. Our company is trying to be much more innovative using materials and a product service system. So we'll just march on this, just a couple of quick slides, and then I'll pass it over. The problem we found, there's 300,000 plastic disposable nappies entering landfills or polluting oceans every minute around the world. It's really, really an insidious problem, but quite blind to most of us. The solution we found on the next page is to stop making nappies out of plastic, which sounds easy, but it's, as you might realize, is quite tricky. You know, polypropylene is one of the cheapest materials on earth. So we have a solution. We deliver, collect and return. It's a product service system. So through a subscription model, we sell compostable nappies, wipes and bags to parents. We collect them through our partners, and then we return those materials to nature in a neutral or beneficial way, which is the real definition of cradle to cradle. In some regions, we're actually making sort of $75 a cubic meter on the compost. These are some pilots we're doing at the moment. We see the developing world, Indonesia, the second biggest marine plastic polluter in the world. 30% of their marine plastic waste is baby nappies, doing things there. The island nation of Tuvalu, if you think about babies for a second, we just had, before we started the call, someone's friend here just had a child. Every baby goes through 5,000 nappies, terrifying statistics. So these 650 babies that live on the island of Tuvalu go through 1 million nappies a year. So we're looking at work to eradicate all of those nappies and make great compost. Completed trial in Bega and working in Hobart.
Thanks, Jason.
All right.
David, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone. And my thanks to both ThinkStep and Planet Ark for the opportunity today. Yeah, Planet Ark been around 30 years, which is fantastic. From our point of view, we've been very involved in things like National Recycling Week for the last 25 years, celebrated its 25-year anniversary. But just a simple couple of slides, just firstly talking about who Infrabuild is. So fundamentally, we're an Australian-based steel maker with our own ferrous and non-ferrous. So we collect both steel and other metals through our own recycling business. We have our own steel making and rolling mills, and ultimately our own metals and reinforcing distribution business right across Australia. Our recycling business collects around 1.4 million tonnes of scrap steel on an annual basis to feed our electric arc furnaces in Sydney or Melbourne, where we melt this down and fundamentally to make new steel products using electricity as the energy source. We make a multitude of those steel products out of that ourselves, including reinforcing steels, bar and mesh, but also other hot rolled steels. And we also manufacture tubular wire products and other steels through both a variety of EAF and blast furnace steels. As you gather from the images there, so bottom left is our scrap bay at our Sydney mill, holds about 20,000 tonnes of steel, of scrap steel, which is less than 2 weeks of production time, through the image in the centre, where it gets turned into billet and ultimately finished product out on the right. We're highly circular. So our mill in Melbourne's been operating since 1985 and the one in Sydney since 1993. And both of those mills use 100% scrap feed, scrap steel as their source. And ultimately, we've been circular long before it was the new black. Even the byproducts, we have nothing that goes to landfill, but the byproducts that come out of the process include things like slag, which gets used primarily as road base, and even the dust that is collected and refined back into the pure zinc and other metals. Just finishing up on 3 points here in my intro, the first of which is around our CN30 objective. So our carbon neutral 30 objective is to be a low emission, carbon neutral steel maker by 2030. So we've set ourselves that goal. It doesn't mean zero emissions, because fundamentally we don't believe that's technologically or commercially viable within that time frame. But it does mean we are going to deliver real and tangible emissions across both our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in that time frame, and use recognised and certified carbon offsets to mitigate those that we can't address in that time frame around becoming carbon neutral. But we're also looking closely at our Scope 3s, our Scope 3 emissions as well, working with our suppliers around the opportunities to reduce those over time. The second which is coming into the base of the discussion here, is around EPDs. So we released 5 environmental product declarations to the market in late 2020, which were an updated first suite of EPDs we released back in 2016. They cover our reinforcing, structural and wire products at both a mill level and also a retail level. So those that gets picked up by our customers. And the final one, just to touch on the bottom, material circularity indicators, really the reason why we're all here today to talk about this topic. For us, material circularity indicators are now embedded in all of our EPDs, and I think we'll probably touch on this in greater detail in the panel discussion. But for us, it's really an opportunity where we've developed those metrics based on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation approach to help support and foster the discussion in this space. So for us, the metrics that we've got in our EPDs allow the sustainability professionals, procurement specialists, the contractual people, the asset owners and others to make informed decisions by using those hard numbers in their discussions. And it evolves the conversation away from just recycled content into something more circular around the MCI metrics. And just like EPDs were 7 or 8 years ago, the evolution of discussion around circularity is gaining more and more momentum in the market, which is fantastic now that we've got metrics out there that people can use that are externally generated and verified in the same way that our EPDs are done. And a quick shout out to thinkstep-anz, who did our EPDs for us, did the heavy lifting there. But it also provides us an internal metric. So it allows us to gauge both our own performance now in terms of our own circularity, but also gives us a metric and a yardstick to improve in over time. So again, thank you, Jim. Hand it back over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And finally, Jed, a brief introduction from you, please.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Dave and Jason. Good to get your stories. And also thank you to thinkstep and Planet Ark. It's great to see you all. I'm a founder and research manager of a company called Xframe. We are based in Australia and New Zealand. We deploy a reconfigurable framing technology called Xframe. This has come from research from my own PhD out of Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. The idea behind this solution is it really digs deep into how do building components, construction elements go together, and how do you deploy circularity at the building scale in the construction sector to achieve reuse. It's the whole premise of why we exist. We come at it from a bio-based material. Obviously, we're using engineered wood products with the rationale of lowering our impact immediately, and then trying to maintain the integrity of those engineered wood parts through multiple use cycles. There's a whole lot of studies about durability and the implications of reconfiguration and certification of components through multiple use cycles, carbon sequestration across use cycles. So all of these challenges involved in implementing circularity at the product level, particularly in construction, where you've got so many different products and aspects trying to come together. So that's Xframe. We have launched formally the business in Australia, thanks to support out of Adelaide, Green Industry South Australia, continuing to grow the business in Australia and into the US in this coming year. The main sort of response, I guess, we've had from Xframe as a system in the market is it's becoming attractive to people, obviously because of its environmental sustainable advantages and its reconfigurability, but that's led to ideas of greater flexibility in terms of office fit outs and residential accommodation, reducing the costs of change over time, minimizing disruptions to sites, and particularly in the offices and internal fit outs where you're making changes, you're reducing the disruption. And so there's some security for the people that are deploying the system, an improved occupant experience in the sense that they can know what the materials is. There's a transparency to it. We're blockchaining and logging all of the data that's embedded in the Xframe system so that people can scan and identify parts. So we're essentially trying to take a digital construction model, roll that into circular economy and deploy that in a product. I guess the final thing to probably note from my point of view is that what we try and deal with is system design. So although you see here the structural framing system, what we're actually looking at is how do all of the layers come onto and off to that system to allow circularity to happen. So it's really exciting times for us, and I'm really excited to get discussion going here. So thanks for having me.
Fantastic, thanks, Jed. That's no small objective. I guess the purpose of this webinar is really to pick your brains in terms of your experiences and to get some of your inside knowledge in terms of how you've gone about implementing the circular economy. But I thought if we could start with your motivation for adopting circular economy principles, what was really the starting point? What really drove you to adopt the circular economy and to really push that forward?
For us, back when we started 20 years ago, it was really around the cradle-to-cradle principles. We read the book, met with Bill McDonough. We were the first product to be cradle-to-cradle certified. And we felt that, we are the only species on Earth that creates waste. And, at the very beginning of our lives, to create that much waste is kind of mind-blowing. So that really was what drove us. And then in terms of that certification particularly, it was particularly unimpeachable. It's just so rigorous what it does. So, to answer your question, I think we just felt this is a product that's 60 years old, very limited innovation, a lot of lock-in effects, two massive companies, Kimberly-Clark and Procter & Gamble there. And we just thought there was an opportunity to do something. And we thought circular was a great tool to do it with.
Hopefully through my intro, people have understood we're highly circular. What we do is take a scrap product that has value, turn that into new steel product. We do that at very high efficiency from a manufacturing and waste mitigation point of view. But I guess from a market point of view, this conversation around circularity is just gaining more and more momentum. So 7 or 8 years ago, people didn't particularly know a lot about EPDs. Now, I expect for many people on the webinar, EPDs are commonplace. We're at the same point of the journey for circularity. So we're starting to see circularity come into the discussion. People have talked about recycled content for many, many years, but circularity takes it quite a bit further from a market point of view. We're seeing some of the predominant rating tools. So, for instance, the IS tool done by Infrastructure Sustainability Council now recognises and awards material circularity indicators within their tool. So it's starting to gain both the use of the metrics, but recognition within the system. For us, material circularity, having those verified numbers, so having numbers that sit alongside at the same level as numbers that people read within EPDs is very important. So it takes away some of the qualitative and makes it more of a quantitative discussion, which is fantastic. And again, for us internally, it provides us a metric that we can use to yardstick how we're doing and how we're evolving and improving over time. So I guess I'd echo, for those who've done EPDs, and that's not an easy process, but once you've done EPDs, including and doing the extra over to get your MCI metrics is relatively simple in terms of the extra over work involved to take that step from generating all the numbers within an EPD to the point at which you can actually have MCI metrics as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll definitely pick your brains a little bit more about MCI in just a minute. Jed, just coming on to you. Firstly, your motivations for adopting circularity, but also your approach is perhaps a bit distinct in terms of approaching the circular economy from a reuse perspective. What particular benefits did you see for your business and your customers from adopting reuse over, say, one of the other circular economy approaches like recycling or remanufacturing?
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So the motivation for the work that we've done is pretty clear. I mean, just like Jason, very little innovation in our sector for the past 50, 100 years, really. Buildings haven't changed. And in fact, the trend is to use less high quality materials, cheaper composites that allow you to build at an economic rate. And so we've used all our high quality materials like our hardwoods and our, really high quality stone products have all been consumed. And so now we're putting together buildings that are using, pressure treated timbers or composite products that simply don't have value at end of life. And so my motivation was to see what value could we start to reintroduce into a house. The normal volume of rubbish coming from the construction sector in the developed world is anywhere between 30 and 40% of all waste is coming from construction. So the motivation for me was quite easy. It was like, this is a big problem. Let's get stuck into it. And as someone coming from research and universities, it's a great place to test these ideas and sort of flush out how we can go about doing this. As the project became more commercially orientated and we started to talk to customers in the industry about how Xframe and the reuse could add value to them, it became very apparent that very few sort of people that are buying building products are actually thinking about that end of life. They buy the product because they need the space, and then who cares what happens in 5 years? That's not my problem, it's someone else. It's generally the person that comes into the next tenancy or the person that buys the house. So we've had to find segments of the sector, construction sector, that are willing to invest in long-term reconfigurability and recoverability. And so for us, that's been education sector, public sector, any long-term tenancy owners, banks, really, really good. But also those that are wanting to expand space easily over the time. So the modular accommodation sector is quite significant in terms of expansion and contraction based on seasonal work or based on influx in projects and that sort of stuff. So that's where we're starting to see the value. It's people that are hanging on to stuff and know that they're going to have a long-term relationship with the product. That seems to be where reuse works really well. Otherwise, there's definitely a tendency to say, well, what's the lowest common denominator? And usually that's not Xframe, just simply because we're not designing for disposability, we're designing for reuse. It's been a very eye-opening last sort of 24 months, 36 months, learning what the industry is ready to accept.
Fantastic. Well, that's you must have some really interesting insights from that as well. I mean, I think the biggest challenge perhaps from the circular economy in terms of embedding it in business is that justification for shifting the business model from something that's been entrenched for so many years to something that is potentially quite scary for a lot of companies. How did you approach justifying going to a circular model from the business perspective? What sort of pitfalls did you encounter? How did you sort of deal with resistance? Did you encounter any resistance in going to a circular model? Jed, if we carry on with you for the moment.
Definitely. I mean, the resistance in construction to circularity is enormous. So it's through regulation, right? In the sense that direct reuse of a product is seen as, sort of a compromise. You're using an inferior secondhand product. So there's an inherent stigma about direct reuse. Recycled materials obviously have the advantage of being recertified, remanufactured, and almost the manufacturer putting their stamp back on the product. But if you're saying, oh no, we're going to deploy a wall for 5 years here, then we're going to take it out and put it in another building, and that client recognizes that as a secondhand product, there's going to be inherent resistance. Does it meet code requirements? Is it strong enough? Has it been damaged? Where was it? And so those are ever present, and there's exactly what you said, Jim. There's a behavior change that has to happen, and it can only really happen through the relationship that those people have with the product. They have to see that this is something that is sort of slightly bigger than themselves, which is quite difficult to do depending on who you're talking to. And as coming from architecture, it's my background. It's getting people to be accountable for what they're specifying. So in construction, there's a tendency to be quickly removed from the product. You're specifying it, someone else gets it, you need to see it, not my problem, wash my hands of it. But actually getting people, hands-on with the products, getting them feeling it, getting them understanding just how much volume of waste comes out of building a wall. You'll do a very simple renovation and you'll be sending tons of waste to landfill, and it's just not seen by lots of the consultants. So we're trying to bring some transparency to that supply chain so that people can understand where the waste is and where we're adding value.
So we're also kind of looking at a new type of user for your products. Are you kind of expecting the purchasers to change their behaviors? How do you think that's going to come about?
That's where the circular economy business model, I think, is really key. We are working through a framework that will allow leasing of the wall system, and that in itself is its own behavior change, because then we need to talk to tenants about, okay, you're just going to lease this wall, we're going to take it back off you. That changes the financial relationship with the product, it changes the use relationship. It also, from our point of view, is quite risky, because what if that product gets damaged and then we're banking on being able to reuse it somewhere else. So that model is key to the long-term success of Xframe as a company, and that business model will sort of supersede what we do now. We're so young and early that our product's only going out. So we're going to learn in the next 3 or 4 years what happens when it starts to get regenerated. We've done the tests, we know the performance is there, but what happens on site when you've got, Roger with his nail gun and an apprentice, who knows what's going to happen.
The real world throws up all sorts of unexpected challenges.
Exactly.
And Jason, I guess there's a couple of parallels there for you as well, in terms of the whole startup profile, getting into starting up a new business focused on a model that's partially reuse and partially composting based. I've had the pleasure of using your product myself on our most recent child. But in terms of getting a product like that onto the market and getting investment, presumably to begin with, how did you find that? Where were the challenges from the business perspective in getting your circular model established?
Yeah, I mean, the product you described, the outer pant that's washable, reusable, the insert that's home compostable, wet ones only, and commercially compostable, that was our 1.0 product. We raised US angel and venture money, but it was sort of pre whatever circular was. But in the US where we launched, there was a degree of appetite around all things sustainable. Today, it's a huge appetite. And what we're finding is one of the rigidities, similar to Jet a little bit, is in most developed economies, and some of the questions here, I think Tyrone's asked a question around this a little bit, it's composting human waste is not permitted. And so it's really interesting. So the owner of the IP in Australia has done incredible work with New South Wales EPA to demonstrate that you can actually compost human waste safely, and they've got the tick of approval, and now they can roll it out. But that's a 3-year project. We've just gotten approval of that in the US. What's fascinating is in Indonesia and Tuvalu, no such regulations exist. So in a funny, strange way, these sustainability transitions can come across even quicker in developing countries, and you can also help them leapfrog. So, 5,000 islands across the archipelago of Indonesia, they don't have landfill, they have oceans that things end up in. we see really cool opportunities with circular economy where we're not faffing around with EPAs to try and get regulatory stuff done. We're just solving a huge plastic waste problem for them. And in terms of capital, it's interesting. We're going out to the markets to get some more capital, and we're really positioning ourselves no longer as a consumer-facing, nappy brand, but a carbon solution, a plastic waste management solution. And really the sources of capital could be just as much the IMF or World Bank, who help fund countries like Tuvalu and Indonesia and Vanuatu, as it is a family office or a regular venture capitalist. But there's certainly a lot more interest in the space, which is exciting from a capital point of view, but there's also a lot more confusion. And in the research I'm doing for my graduate work, I think people here might know that there's 114 definitions of the circular economy. So it's a very confused, contested space in some ways. And the cynic would say, well, it's just sustainability dressed up, or it's just recycling, and that's kind of tricky. The other element is, Kimberly Clark. We've got a Kimberly Clark guy on our board who's fantastic. We've worked very closely with Procter & Gamble. We've done engagement with Ontex, the largest white label diaper manufacturer in the world. And it is fascinating as a smaller, innovative company working with the big guys to understand the rigidities that they face and just how hard it is to turn the ship. Polypropylene nappies, you can make 400 a minute. Our nappies, you can only make 320 a minute. And that delta, no more profit. It's amazing. The marketing guys are excited. The CEO's excited. The guy on the factory floor is very unexcited.
But moving to David, particularly building on that question about your business justification for circularity. You mentioned earlier that you're using MCI alongside your EPDs for your products. Particularly, what sort of benefits have you seen already from using MCI or a circularity metric alongside your EPDs?
No, thanks, Jim. It's a great question. I think probably two sides to that equation. One, looking internally in our own business, the work that we do in generating EPDs goes to a huge amount of detail, and it allows us to actually understand with metrics our processes. So where are we using materials? How much of that material is being captured and reused each time? How much is going as a byproduct? So when I spoke about slag and baghouse dust, but ultimately, from a business point of view, the more that we can keep circular, the less that we wind up as a waste or a byproduct. That's an efficiency of materials. It's an efficiency of processing and manufacturing technique. It's a waste minimisation, all of which comes to a cost and a product efficiency point of view. So internally, it helps us inform to become the best that we can become, and in that bigger picture of decarbonising the built environment and what we can do to decarbonise our products that go into those. And from a market perspective, so we piloted our initial work on MCI metrics back in, it was about 2017. We started with one of our product ranges, so a little bit of walk before we run to understand what the process would be before we evolved it for all of our products. But even at that stage, it was starting to come back from the market around that discussion of we need some metrics. We need to move from just recycled content, which is one part of circular, it's the input side, but it doesn't speak to what happens to the product at end of life. And I think one of the slides Jason put up in his intro about what we traditionally knew as the 3 Rs, which is now 9 or 10 Rs, really speaks to that. So you've got to build design efficiency and constructability into the projects or products. It doesn't need to be a project, but even products. So everything that you do, you want to start with the best solution from a design point of view, from a constructability point of view, before you start to overlay sustainability metrics, let alone circularity metrics. There's no point trying to make a poor design sustainable by overlaying EPD data or material circularity indicators. So for us, there was both what it guides and informs us from an internal point of view, but also what's the market drivers around needing to know more about circularity and ultimately where we can develop a leadership position, become a differentiated product within the market, but also help to foster those discussions in the market so more and more people can understand the reasons of value for looking at the whole process in terms of what you're making, whether it's steel or diapers or timber frames or widgets, whatever it might be.
So are you actually seeing strong demand for information on circularity of your products from your consumers? It
is evolving, and I think, as I mentioned in my intro, the IS tool now enshrines material circularity indicators within its tool, so it's starting to be recognised. We're starting to see it from procurement specialists contractual specialists start to be written in. At this stage, not a lot of that uses hard numbers, but it talks to circularity, because ultimately people understand circularity is one of the vehicles to decarbonise. And I think, Jed, as you mentioned, around minimising construction and demolition waste, either at the input stage or at the end of life stage.
I mean, picking up on the sort of EPDs and transferring that across to circularity, I mean, I guess, Jason, one of the unique things you bring to this panel is the experience of your Cradle to Cradle certification. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey in getting Cradle to Cradle certified, and what your motivation for that certification was, and what benefits you've seen from that?
I've never had a child, but if I did have a child, I think it would be harder than childbirth by a factor of 1 million. It was so hard, but it was really worthwhile. It involved, we had to engage with our manufacturer in Ohio. They signed an NDA with the folks from Cradle to Cradle, and then everyone up the supply chain, every element, if you think of every element of that product, signs an NDA, and that took months to convince them. And what we found was they screen each of the materials. We found a red material upstream, and it's really interesting because you actually end up educating much bigger companies in your supply chain. We were pre-revenue at this point, and this company didn't realize that material chymene was a problem, and they replaced it at no additional cost, and we got certification. But I think what was really exciting was the network of knock-on effects. Everyone then started thinking, well, what else is happening here? The manufacturer in Ohio, third generation nappy manufacturer, now has a very cradle to cradle looking office in Ohio, which isn't particularly progressive, but it's a cradle to cradle carpets. They really did an incredible redesign to really embrace it. They have zero waste. They recycle everything. And when you're making nappies, there's a lot of stuff that happens from manufacturing excess materials and stuff. So that was really exciting. And then as more products got the certification, method cleaning products and others, our retail partners like Target would then have end caps over the year and just highlight all the Cradle to Cradle products, which was just a very cool thing to see as we got scale and you all got grouped, which I thought was very clever. And as a certification and a mark, totally unimpeachable. I think we saw last week the UK government's brought out new guidelines around greenwashing. And the FTC in the US did it about 7 or 8 years ago, and we had dialogue with them, and they kind of reviewed all of our stuff, and they looked at that Cradle to Cradle thing. They said, that's unimpeachable. That's fine. So I think it's well worth doing. I think in a world of greenwashing, it puts things right up there, but it's certainly not easy, but worthwhile. And happy to talk more with anyone one-on-one if you'd like to.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's an amazing journey to go on, and the interactions with your supply chain to actually bring that about, as I said, must have been really, really intense at times. Yeah. I mean, we hear it quite often that these little trigger points that happen. I've heard from executives who've walked through an office and noticed a funny smell from newly installed carpets and wondered what that was and whether they should be worried about it. And those little triggers that can set you off and make you ask the questions about, should I be concerned about this? It doesn't take much of a nudge for that to create a bit of a snowball. So I guess a question for all of you, I guess we are running a little bit close to the time now. What do you wish you had known before you really started on this journey? What was the if you could go back in time to your former self and impart some knowledge on what to expect or how to deal with this transition from a linear business to a circular, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
I would say from my point of view, if it's a new product, if it's a new business, if it's a startup, there needs to be some sort of like formal connection to the existing ways of doing business. And you need someone in that area that can really look at that critically and see the holes and see the opportunities. For me, obviously coming from university into the construction sector, there's some inherent walls and academic telling the builder what to do, that sort of stuff. So if you're on the other side of the fence enough pushing it back to you, it's much easier to make change happen. And evidently, as we've gone through the growth and the commercialization process of the technology, those people have come on board. They've given us great feedback that would have been really great 3 years ago. But we value it now and we keep pushing forward.
Fantastic. And David, what would your...
Yeah, probably a couple of takeaways thinking about is, first of which is time. this all does take time. From developing our MCIs and even our EPDs, churning out 5 or 6 EPDs as we did, it's a 12 to 18 month exercise. Behind that, data collection is the key. You need great data to be able to dive in and understand it. But once you've got that data, your opportunities just grow and evolve. So we've got part of our CN30 objective is around understanding how we can decarbonise, and to do that, we need great data. And we've got a couple of other things in motion coupled with ThinkStep as well. But where that data and that work we've done up front that we've collected and analysed has provided fantastic stepping stones that we can take back into the business and say this is a great opportunity for both us and for the market. But yes, certainly great data, and it will take a little longer than you think, but it's well worth the journey.
Collaboration is at the centre of circularity, and as someone who did an undergraduate degree in economics and was doing normal business, I mean, it's a massive wall to kind of break down, and to sit across the table from a Procter & Gamble, and that can be really hard. That can be incredibly hard. And if you think about a product service system, so for us, in Hobart, the product is sold to the childcare centre. Veolia does the collection. The City of Hobart does the composting, and then that compost is sold. Like, there's a lot of moving parts there, which isn't normal. Yeah. So I think if I'd embraced the collaborative piece earlier, we would have been further down the road.
Fantastic. And on that topic, I wanted to come and finish off with a question for Nicole, really. We just heard from Jason about the importance of collaboration, and a lot of companies are locked in this linear way of a strong focus on competition. How do you see your members overcoming their traditional competitive approach and fostering a more collaborative approach to bring about the circular economy?
Yeah, I think examples such as what Jason just described, actually you've all described a collaboration to some degree. I think that businesses are really starting to see that there is not only benefits, but it's the way we need to do business moving forward. Personally, I'm connected to a range of different projects outside of Planet Ark, where particularly around polypropylene, for example, the Next Loop project that focuses on food grade polypropylene recovery and recycling. That's an all of supply chain, there are members in that project from every element of the supply chain, because they recognise that it's so important to be able to work together, to be able to deliver what is needed. We're running out of resources. We really don't have a choice to reject collaboration now if we are to actually have, a future that we see as sustainable or even viable, to some degree. So, that's a big call. But I really do believe that collaboration, and from the examples that we're seeing at the ACE Hub as well, collaboration is not only critical, but it's also so valuable to businesses. I think
collaboration is required at a whole new level than we're used to.
Yeah, and I think if I can also add, Jim, I think it's being brave enough to think outside your traditional supply chain with collaboration as well. So Jason described that in his supply chain, you've actually got a composter that's part of that discussion. What's composting got to do with babies' poop and nappies? That's the sort of, you have to be thinking more system approach, as Jed described earlier. It's really so critical to creating the products and materials that we need for the future.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard it from Ellen MacArthur herself, the need to ask the "and then what" question. Yeah. We have this product, and then what? I think this question is for Jed in terms of forest certification. We can have forest certification, but when going into pre-nail, the chain of custody is getting lost. How is that dealt with from the timber manufacturing? I think you mentioned using blockchain and.
Yeah, for that one, you should actually just be able to get the pre-nail firm to get a stewardship certification or a Forest Stewardship Council certification. That should be possible. So, for example, we have a FSC certified source log. In the case, it's a Pinus radiata, New Zealand, processed in a local manufacturing centre where it's just cut into logs and then shipped to another factory that is then turning it into engineered wood products like plywood. That second processing factory will carry an FSC certification, and so should the pre-nailer if they want your business, clearly. So I think talk them into it.
Fantastic. Focuses on the issues of recycling packaging. Do any of you have suggestions in terms of how to make packaging materials more circular?
I know we've done a lot of work, Jim, around, because that forms part of our Scope 3 emissions, is working with both using products that are then either recyclable or at least reusable at best, or recyclable if that's not possible. But the step behind that, again, talking to Jason's beautiful slide in his intro, was just minimise or eliminate packaging, make it safe, transportable and usable, but with the minimum of packaging wherever possible.
I think with that we can wrap up for today. I would like to take the time to thank both Planet Ark and all of you as panelists for this session. I think it's been really fascinating. I could have done with another hour to go through all the questions I have, but I will follow up with you offline on those. But thank you all for taking the time to join us today. It's been a real pleasure and an insight, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thanks,
Fantastic.
Thinkstep.